My parents gave my sister $80,000 toward her house. They told me I didn't need help. Last month they asked if they could move in with me. I had an answer ready. Posted to r/true off my chest. The conversation happened over dinner. My parents do this. They wait until there is food on the table and wine poured, and the specific warmth of a shared meal making everyone feel like the world is generous and accommodating, and then they say the thing. It has always been their preferred conditions for asking for something large. My mother said, "We've been thinking about the future, about what makes sense as we get older." My father said, "The condo is a lot to maintain." My mother said, "We were wondering whether you had thought about whether there might be room in your house for us." I had been wondering when this was coming for approximately 3 years, which is how long I have owned my house, which I bought without any help from anyone, which I mention not as a boast but as the central fact of a pattern I am going to describe. I put down my fork. I said, "I want to have an honest conversation about that." They looked at each other in the way parents look at each other when a child has said something that suggests the conversation will not go the way they planned. I said, "Do you remember when Carla bought her house?" My name is Dominique. I am 38. My sister Carla is 34. My parents are Patricia and Leonard, and they are, by any external measure, good people who love both of their daughters. I want to say that clearly because what I am about to describe is not malice. It is something that operates beneath malice, quieter, and in some ways harder to address. The soft, cumulative favoritism that shapes a family without anyone deciding to shape it, that becomes visible only when you lay the specific instances side by side and look at them honestly. I have been laying them side by side for about 4 years. Here's what I found. Carla bought her house at 31. My parents contributed $80,000 toward her down payment. I know the exact number because my mother mentioned it to me at the time in the tone of someone sharing good news, not in the tone of someone aware that the news might land differently for the person receiving it. $80,000, plus they covered her moving costs and bought her a new washer and dryer and spent a weekend helping her set up the kitchen. When I bought my house at 35, I had saved my own down payment across 9 years of deliberate, sometimes uncomfortable financial discipline. I saved while paying off my own student loans, which I did alone. I saved while renting apartments that were smaller than I wanted because smaller meant more money set aside each month. I saved by making choices that deferred the things I wanted in favor of the thing I was building toward. My parents came to see the house the weekend after I closed. My mother said it had good bones. My father said the neighborhood seemed promising. They did not offer money. They did not offer to help me move. My mother sent a housewarming card with a gift card to a home goods store for $75, which I have thought about many times in relation to the $80,000. When I mentioned, carefully, the disparity, not at the time, but 2 years later, in a conversation I had prepared for, my mother said, "Dominique, you've always been so independent. You didn't need us the way Carla did." That sentence. I want to stay with it. You didn't need us the way Carla did. What it contains, the explanation for the $80,000 delivered as a compliment to me. The implication that my not asking was evidence of not needing, and that not needing justified not offering. The further implication that Carla's needing was a reason to give rather than a reason to examine whether the pattern of giving had created the needing. What it does not contain, any acknowledgement that I had needed and had not asked because asking had not historically produced results, that I had learned early which child received when things were distributed and had adjusted accordingly, that my independence was not a character trait I had arrived at naturally, but a posture I had developed in response to an environment that had quietly communicated that I was the one who could handle things on her own. I said, "I needed help. I just didn't ask." She said, "You should have said something." I said, "Would it have made a difference?" She did not answer that. I want to give you the texture of the favoritism because I think texture is what makes the difference between a family pattern and a single incident, and this was a pattern. When we were children, Carla was the sensitive one, and I was the capable one. These were the family's categories for us, established early, applied consistently. The sensitive one required management, care, attunement. The capable one could be trusted to figure things out. These categories were not cruel in intention. They were adaptive. Carla did feel things intensely I did navigate independently. But the categories also produced consequences that accumulated. The sensitive one received more attention, more reassurance, more of my parents' emotional and practical resources directed toward her difficulty. The capable one received more autonomy and less support, which was framed as respect for her self-sufficiency, and which was also, simply, less. When Carla struggled in college, my parents flew to see her twice in one semester. When I struggled, and I did struggle, quietly, in the way of someone who has learned that struggling is not something she is allowed to display, I called my best friend. When Carla's car broke down at 26, my father drove 3 hours to help her. When my car broke down at 28, I called a tow truck. When Carla went through a difficult breakup at 29, my mother spent a week with her. When I went through a difficult breakup at 32, my mother called twice. None of these individual instances is a crime. Each one is explainable. Carla was closer. Carla asked. Carla needed more. The explanations are all available and all partially true. What they don't account for is the direction. The consistent, reliable, decades-long direction of resources, time, money, presence, attention, flowing toward Carla and away from me, and the family's explanation for that direction being my own adequacy. I had become, through my own capability and the family's recognition of it, the child who subsidized Carla's care by requiring none of my own. The dinner conversation continued. I said, "When Carla bought her house, you gave her $80,000. My father said, Carla was in a different situation. I said, what situation was I in that was different? My mother said, you were established. You had savings. I said, I had savings because I spent 9 years saving while managing my own student loans and my own everything else with no help from anyone. The savings were the result of not being helped, not evidence that I didn't need help. My father said, we didn't think you wanted us involved. I said, I didn't ask because I had learned what asking produced. But I want to be honest with you about something because I think we need to be honest with each other before we can talk about the future. They were both very still. I said, I've spent my entire adult life being the child who was fine, the capable one, the one who didn't need the 80,000 or the weekend visits or the help with moving. And I have mostly been fine. But fine and supported are not the same thing, and what you're asking me now, whether there's room in my house for you, is something I can only answer honestly if we're both clear about the history we're carrying into that question. My mother said, we've always been there for you. I said, in the ways that were asked of you. I'm asking you to think about the ways that weren't asked because I had learned not to ask. My father looked at the table. My father is a man who processes difficult information by going quiet, which is different from not processing it. I have learned to wait for the quiet to finish. He said, we didn't give you the same. It was not a question. It was a man in his late 60s arriving at a thing he had probably known peripherally for a long time and was now saying out loud for the first time. I said, no, you didn't. My mother said, we didn't think you needed. I said gently, I know. That's what we're talking about. What I told them next is the part one had been prepared for since I understood this conversation was coming. I said I love them. I said that clearly first because it was true and because I did not want anything that followed to be received as not love. I said, I have thought about this a lot, about what I want our relationship to look like as you get older. And here is what I know. I said, I am not in a position to have you move into my house. Not because of the space, there is technically room, but because the dynamic that has existed between us for 38 years has never been honestly examined, and I am not willing to replicate it in my own home. I am not willing to be the capable one who manages everything while Carla receives something different. I am not willing to take on the daily labor of your care, which is real and significant, and which I watched our family's resources get reorganized around when it was someone else needing care, and have that labor be invisible the way my needs were invisible. My mother said, we would contribute. I said, I know you would try. That's not the issue. The issue is the pattern. The issue is that I would be the one who did the daily work and Carla would be the one who visited, and I would be the capable one who handled it, and the roles would be exactly what they have always been, and I am not willing to walk into that. The table was quiet. I said, "What I am willing to do is this. I am willing to help you figure out what aging looks like in a way that is actually planned and fair and doesn't rest on the assumption that I will absorb whatever is needed, because I'm the one who can. I can help you research options. I can be involved. I can be your daughter, genuinely, in the ways I have always wanted to be your daughter. But not the default absorber of last resort." My father said, "What about Carla?" I said, "What about her?" He said, "She has the bigger house." There it was. The thing that had been in the room since the beginning of the conversation. The $80,000 house was bigger. The house they had funded was the house they were now considering. And Carla had said no, or had been unavailable in some way that had redirected them to me, the capable one, who could be counted on. I said, "I think that's a conversation worth having with Carla." Directly. My mother looked like she wanted to say something that she stopped herself from saying. I said, "I'm not trying to make this difficult. I'm trying to make it honest. Honest is the only way I know how to do this." My parents left after dinner. I stood at my window and watched their car pull out of my driveway, and I felt something I want to describe accurately, which is not triumph and not guilt, and not the complicated relief of having finally said the thing. It felt like standing on ground that was mine. My house, my ground, my decision, reached by my own process. The same way the down payment had been mine, the savings had been mine, the 9 years of deliberate choices had been mine. No one had handed me the capacity to say what I had just said. I had built it the same way I had built everything else, without assistance over time, by showing up for myself in the absence of anyone else doing it. I called my best friend Renata afterward. She has known me for 20 years, and she has been watching this particular situation develop with the engaged, clear-eyed attention of someone who sees the whole picture. She said, "How do you feel?" I said, "Like I finally stopped being the capable one and started being myself." She said, "Those were always the same person. You just didn't know you were allowed to choose which one to be." I want to say something before I close, not as a lesson. I am 38 and still figuring things out and not in the business of handing out lessons, but as the honest summary of what I have been sitting with. The money was never really about the money. $80,000 is significant, and I am not going to pretend the number doesn't matter. But what it represented was larger than itself. It was the family saying, "This child's need is real, and this child's need is actionable, and we are going to respond to it." And the other side of that, unspoken, was, "That child is fine. I was fine. I am fine. Capable, established, managing." I was also a person who watched her family organize itself around her sister's needs for 38 years while her own were quietly categorized as absent, and who built her own life anyway, and who is now being asked to absorb the final and largest of the family's needs into the house she built alone. The answer is no. Not a punishing no. Not an "I don't love you" no. A no that comes from 38 years of finally understanding that being capable does not mean being available for everything, and that the ground I am standing on is mine because I built it, and I get to decide what gets built on it next. I built it. It's mine. Edit. Carla texted me 3 days after the dinner. She said Mom had called her. She said, "I didn't know about the conversation you had. I also didn't know you felt the way you do about the house stuff. Can we talk?" I said yes. We have a call scheduled for Sunday. I don't know what it will produce. But she asked, which is more than I expected, and I am going to show up for it honestly.